Hello. Very nice. Hello, everyone. My name is German. I'll be hosting the clinic tonight, or today. Tonight. I'm already ahead of you. With Plini, and unfortunately, Plini has been delayed, so he just got to the airport, and he will be here in about half an hour. So if you could please sit tight and just wait, it's definitely going to be worth it. In the meantime, I'll be entertaining you. So, don't have my guitar with me, but I could do something. A dance? Or we talk about some music. So, let's figure this out. So, since we have to kill some time, I'm assuming everyone is a guitar player here? No? Who said no? What? What are you what are you doing here? All right. No, no sweat. By the end of this day, you'll be playing guitar, for sure. Awesome. All right. So first off, thanks so much for coming and attending. And I'm sorry about the delay. Travel can always be quite difficult. But as soon as he here, everything is ready and ready to go. And he will be presenting, I think, a pretty awesome clinic. Make sure you have all your questions prepared, and hopefully your guitars out. Everybody got guitars with them, more or less. Take notes. But anyways, so let's see. How are you guys enjoying the program so far? Yeah. Very nice. All right. So let's see. What can we start with?
Give us your life story.
My life story is very short. Anyways, so let's figure some things out. Do you guys have any questions in regards to playing guitar? How to tune it? How to play guitar? I don't know. I'm starting from the bottom. Excuse me? The tuning for the first string. Well, what's your first string? What's your first string? You take it from the bottom, from the top, and how many strings do you have on the guitar? 6, 7, 8, 9, 20. So the thickest string will be tuned to E on a 6-string guitar. Same thing goes for the highest. But it's a good question. Some people don't know that. All right, what are your practice habits like? Everybody practices every day? For how long? About an hour? You guys changing different techniques, different objectives in your practice schedule? All right. So obviously, practice can be quite an odd thing to do, especially for guitar players. I think we all like routine, right? So everybody has kind of like a favorite warm-up exercise they're playing, more or less. Is it a pure technical exercise, or is it a melodic exercise? Mastered puppets? It's right in between, melodic and technical. All right. So I've come to experiment with practice a little bit over my years, and I found that splitting it into different sections helps a lot, since humans cannot really focus for that long, and overworking your practice doesn't really yield much result. So how many minutes do you spend with, let's say, one particular exercise?
Depends what you want to accomplish with that exercise.
That is true. So let's say a simple picking exercise. Alternate picking.
Metronome.
Right, but for how long?
10 to 15 minutes.
10 to 15 minutes.
So you're at I forgot what stuff to do.
All right, wow, 10 to 15 minutes. That's quite a long, and it's just one exercise or different ones?
I try to structure. I do like alternate picking for like 3 minutes, sweep picking for another 3 minutes. No, just picking exercise, like simple stuff on the left hand. Try to.
Interesting, cool. Are you also changing keys every day? Yes? Or are you staying in the favorite key of D minor?
Or A minor.
Or A minor? Yeah, so I think the hard part is, to cover as many keys as possible. Now, it's natural that, certain keys for us guitar players are not always necessary, but from an academic standpoint, it's probably best to practice all 12 keys. Although, in my experience, I haven't practiced in all 12 keys in a long time since I left school because it was just not necessary. There's little gigs or songs I had to play in the key of A flat or D flat. And if somebody throws me G flat, I'll just detune the guitar. So, that's how that goes. All right, let's see. Well, still ways to go.
Can you tell us a joke?
A joke. Yeah, I can serve you with that. How do you make a guitar player shut up?
Put your music in front of them. Yeah.
Very nice, very nice.
Everyone should never talk
That's a
about
staple
anything
to
else.
know. That's a staple joke to know. Definitely at a music school, for sure. All right. Feel kind of naked without my guitar, talking about all this stuff, but we'll see how this goes. Yes.
So I'm like a complete beginner at guitar. I'm a drummer, and I'm learning how to play guitar.
Good.
What will be the first thing that you ever work on? Like, I mean, I know how to play like basic things, like I can read a tab, but maybe I can memorize the fretboard.
So if you're just starting out to play the guitar, I think it's most important to focus on just a few basic chords and playing rhythm. Since you're a drummer, that will come in handy. Once your fingers are used to fretting this really odd instrument and have good time, you can go on further. Learning all the notes and everything on the guitar will come naturally over time, but just focusing on it from a mere beginning would probably be too much and kind of dwarf your enthusiasm for playing guitar because, it is very boring. Okay, so learn a couple of chords and maybe go through the rhythm pyramid. Everybody knows the rhythm pyramid?
Oh,
So you start with a whole note, you go for a half note, quarter note triplets, and then you go for 8 notes, 8 note triplets, 16th notes, quintuplets, 6-tuplets, 7-tuplets, 32nd notes, and then all the way back. I would like to try this experiment, but I feel like we're going to get lost in translation with the click up here, so we're not going to do that. But it's a great little feat. You can practice your scales with that idea, your chords, your rhythm playing in general. These are all really, really important things to practice. Because if you have a stable foundation of rhythm, your technique will benefit from it. Because a lot of times, I'm sure everybody has noticed this over the times of practice, we kind of set our left and right hand on automation, and we'll just go as fast as we can without any regard of the actual rhythm or how the notes are supposed to be over time, distributed over time. And that usually leads to the problem of losing synchronization. So you just basically play a tremolo on as many notes as you can, but you're not really getting anywhere, right? So if you have that foundation of having good rhythm and understanding of time, you can play your licks a lot cleaner, and you have a better control of the different techniques you're trying to play. Okay. All right. So what's the hardest song you have learned so far? John? Okay. Anybody else?
Dystopian Overture by Dream Theater.
Okay. So how do you go about learning these songs?
Measure for measure.
Measure for measure. That's a good way. Do you do it by ear? Do you do it with a transcription or a combination thereof? By ear?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just tossing it out.
Well, if the song is a bit simple, just by ear. If I find it really difficult, I'm a type guy.
Okay.
I'm not into.
Right, right.
I'm just learning how to read.
Well, learning how to read. So here's a tip for learning how to read. just do it. There's nothing else you can do, right? Just get a piece of music, start knowing where the notes are in the first string, and just try to read, you know. So that's always the most difficult part in learning how to read. You just have to start doing it. There's unfortunately no method, no computer program, no magic potion that you can take that makes you read. All right, I'm running out of material. Do you have any questions for me? Yes? No? No questions? Wow.
Play guitar.
Play guitar. My guitar is right now at home. I'll have a clinic tonight at 7 o'clock. It's all about shred guitars, so I think that might be right up your alley. So if you want to come by, it's at the 1140 building in 1A.
What time does it end?
7 o'clock. It ends at 8. So if you want to come by, you know, bring a guitar, and I'll show you some stuff, some strategies, some licks, more with. Right? All right. I know. Sit tight. He'll be here very soon. All right. Maybe we get the house to pull up some Plini music. Can you pull up some music? Can you pull up some music? Plini?
What's the hardest song that you've ever had to learn? Do you have a name?
Every song is hard. stuff ready, and we should be with you in 3 minutes. Okay?
Yeah, I got my guitar. Yeah. That's what I use.
All right. Please welcome Plini.
Can you all hear me like this? Yeah. I guess it doesn't work if you can't, because you can't really say no. But
You probably cheered too soon, because I'm not really here yet. It'll probably ruin it out.
Let's find out about it.
$2,000 power in front of him if you want to move it to that outlet.
Yep, just noticed.
oh, you're there. All right.
Is that enough in your wedge there?
Take a little more. Perfect. So like in 6 minutes. So let's pretend that my flight wasn't delayed. This all just happened, and then you came into the room, and then I'm sitting here totally ready, and then this happens. need this? Does this help? Probably does. It makes me sound powerful. What are we doing? Why are we here? What are we like? Who wants to tell me something? You. See, how you feel right now is how I felt when I walked in and I was like trying to untangle my guitar from underwear because I just packed it this morning. And I was thinking about this on the plane, which was sitting on the tarmac and possibly not taking off. And I was just thinking about how I could be prepared, but I still might not be here, and then I'd feel really bad because you'd probably be sitting here staring at a wall for 2 hours. And then I can't remember where this is going. I'm trying to save you from having to ask something. But I feel like that is a feeling that if you study anything or if you make music and have to go to a live gig, that's just that like uneasiness about what you're about to do is something that happens all the time. So I started wondering why I felt uneasy, as in not because I had underwear on my guitar, but because I was possibly late or possibly going to miss it. And I figured it's probably because I was looking forward to, actually that sounds bad, I am looking forward to this. But my idea of what it would be is me arriving on time and early and then setting up and sound checking and then like standing in the corner while you all come in and being like, fuck yeah, people actually came to see me. And then coming out, and then when you're cheering, I could just be there like, this is sick, instead of trying to figure out what my password is. So anyway, the moral of the story is things don't always go to plan, but luckily we're all in a field where improvisation is respected, so that's cool. Who has a question? Yeah. Eights. The other day, I had a guitar. I think it had 10 gauges on it, and they were really old. And a trick that I learnt when I was young is that if you detune them, some of the gunk falls off. So I tuned it down like a fifth, and so I was bending like half an octave, and I just thought that was really cool because I didn't need strong hands to sound rock and roll. But if I was recording, I'd probably go for 13 gauges. Yep.
I think I saw that you're going to talk about your process of like creating songs. But the thing I most wonder when I listen to your songs is they're like 18 guitars playing at the same time. And I was wondering, what is your process of recording several guitars? Is it like all you, like just overdubbing everything, or is it, do you call your mate, I forgot your friend guitarist?
Jake?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
it. So do you call him to play, like to record with you? What is the process of like recording about 5, 6 guitars at the same time?
Is there a song in particular? It doesn't really. Well, I'll use the one that I just played,
Okay.
which I have somewhere. So typically it starts from one guitar, and that is kind of like the part. Like usually I won't write a layer first and then think I'm going to write a sick riff to that one note. So something like, in the case of this song, something like this happened. And I was like, cool, I just ripped off Monuments and Periphery, and I'm going to make money from it. For that, I recorded that riff left and right, which is pretty typical for this type of music, and then started playing around with stuff I could do over it. So that could be... And then the easiest thing to add to that, because it doesn't require thinking, is the octave. So I'll record the riff left and right, and then record this simple sort of melody part, usually in the center, and then the octave either again left and right, or
in the center. And actually, how many of you are recording and producing your own music? I guess most of you. So something that I like to do that Simon, who mixed my last EP, told me never to do again is, but I'm still going to pass on the knowledge, is if you take a stereo delay and shift one side just by about 10 milliseconds or so, you get fake stereo, and it's really doesn't save you that much more time than just playing it twice, but I got in the habit of doing it a lot, so I do that sometimes, but I guess now I'd recommend just recording the harmony left and right. And that sounded like this. You can hear there's a lot of delay. Typically, at least one thing should have delay on it at all times. That's definitely not a rule of thumb, but I can't think of a time that I've not used delay. So it is kind of just a process of trial and error with adding different things. And I guess if you have a riff that's happening somewhere down here, you're not going to choose melody notes that are down there. So they'll be here and then octaved or harmonized. And then I guess later in the song, there's even more because there is so that section I ripped off from Virgil Donati. He's got a song called 11, and it might even be in the same key. Sorry. And I even asked the drummer who played on it to do a Virgil thing with the 2 hi-hats. But I'll talk about why I think that's okay in a second. So that has a clean part added on top. And then there's a solo played on top of that. And I guess because I come from a background of rock as opposed to jazz, my knowledge of harmony is like Blink-182 and classic rock. But the more I play guitar, the more I get interested in stuff that sounds uglier and wouldn't appear in any of their music. And that's mostly thanks to Tim Miller, who's sitting over there, because he plays weird alien music, in my opinion, and I think it's great. So if I write a riff like that one, that's using the same, that's like, I don't even know what genre that is, hard rock or something like that. But then playing chords on top that are more, like that's a little ugly or whatever. So I'll take the simple riff and then just play around with chords until something interesting like that comes about, and then write a solo over the top of that. So it starts off simple and is all kind of based in stuff that's very familiar and sort of safe to me because of all the years I've spent listening to rock and metal and stuff like that, and then experimenting with ways to steal or borrow from other people to blend it in a way that's less obvious or is hopefully a sound that hasn't been explored before. And that's what I was going to say before about my blatant ripping off of everyone I love, is to me that's where a lot of my favorite music comes from. I feel like genres matter less and less, or we're just inventing subgenres at a ridiculous rate. Like the first metalcore band was probably ridiculed or shamed because they weren't like true metal, but they weren't hardcore. But now it's a huge genre. But then there's like a band like Periphery who are kind of metalcore but way more progressive, so a lot of traditional progressive music sounds nothing like it, but then it's way too weird to be metalcore. And then the bands, which probably a lot of us are in, that are influenced by Periphery, are also going to Berkeley and studying jazz and studying classical and bringing that into it. And then Jacob Collier comes along and just does everything under the sun. And that makes me really excited because our whole generation, more so you guys than me because I have a small brain, are going to learn all the weird harmonic devices that he uses, and that's just going to be normal to you. I guess the same way that smartphones are normal to us, but to previous generation, it's like, how come I can see my family on the other side of the world in your pocket? Like, that's weird as fuck, but it's normal to us. So I guess this kind of, maybe it's related to your question, maybe not, but my goal with writing guitar parts or music in general is always to try and bring together things that I like that haven't been brought together before. And I think if you can do that in a way that is different to what has been done before, that's what makes it original and personal, because we're using the same gear and notes and stuff like that. But the question was guitar parts. Thanks. Yep.
Do you have any advice on mastering time, like what exercises you do? Because I feel like when you do runs, you're so perfectly in time. And I feel like if I do something really fast, I have a tendency to naturally speed up. And I just kind of want to know what you did to work on that.
I listen to this all the time. Oops. That's my life. And not really for practicing scales or anything like that, but just because my whole pursuit of music has been to do with writing and recording. As soon as anything sounds remotely cool on the guitar, I have to do it to that. And I have to do it to that pretty well in order for it to kind of make me excited about it and think that it's a good idea. But I've been doing it for 15 years, maybe, like quite a long time, accidentally. If you told me 15 years ago I was going to spend that much time practicing to a metronome, I would have quit because I really don't like it. But I mean, that really is what I've found to be the best way to accidentally get better at everything, is recording. Because you listen back, and because you love all the artists that you love, you have really high standards. So if I hear myself playing out of time, I'll hear it and be like, I'm never going to tour with Dream Theater if that's what I sound like. Or with vibrato, if it sounds kind of a little rushed or anxious or something like that, I'll go back and redo it. And actually, I think the thing that I spend the most time doing when recording is slow solos and parts of phrasing, because I hate the sound of my own playing so much that I have to make it at least okay in order to kind of continue with the song. But if you don't hate the idea of playing with the metronome and can sit and work through different patterns, then that's immediately going to make you better. Yep, at the back. You, yeah.
So when you write music, like let's say, what are your different type of goals with each track you made, each piece you write?
Depends on the song. I think as I get older, which seems to happen on a daily basis, that sounded half deep and half extremely stupid. I care less about most things in music aside from whether I think it's conveying an emotion, because I guess some of you might have come to a workshop or something with me before, and I will have told you that most of my music is Lydian, and it's kind of so I'll sit down and write a Lydian song and be like, that's cool, I used an odd time signature, I put a cool guitar solo in it, I put some orchestra in it, there's whatever else, and then it kind of all makes sense as a composition, but then I wonder if I'm actually saying anything that I haven't said before emotionally. And I find it kind of confusing as well because I listen to so much music that isn't in the genre that I make that sometimes I'll sit down and write a beat that is electronic and I'll be like, this is cool, and I kind of won't care and keep going with it. But then I'll listen to it the next day and be like, have I gone too far? So I guess the goal really is to experiment with stuff as openly as possible, but be extremely critical of whether it sounds cool because it's new or it sounds cool because I got to show off something like an odd time signature or a cool lick, or if it tells a story. I wrote a song recently that wasn't necessarily weirder than anything I've written before, but had a lot of not guitar. Like there's only one real guitar part. And I sent it to a friend of mine, Jakub Żetecki, if you know him. He plays in Disperse, crazy guitar player. And what I've noticed is that the way that he writes is, he's kind of like 3 or 4 years ahead of where I wish I was at all times. So I find now I'm doing stuff that he was doing 3 years ago. And so I sent it to him and I was like, tell me what you think. And he was like, oh man, thank you for sending this to me. I want to send you something of mine for you to tell me what you think. And one thing that he said was that he felt that the structure was quite repetitive, even though it wasn't a particularly long song, but it did use the same melody 3 or 4 times. And then the song he sent me was almost not repetitive. It almost had, I think it had one part that repeated in the entire 6 minutes, and it just kind of went all over the place, but emotionally made a lot of sense. And he said, I feel bad repeating an idea unless it's really the best thing ever. And that made me question everything, because a few months ago I was like, I finally figured out what I want to do is write stuff that's in odd time signatures with cool harmony and cool guitar playing, but it's also kind of just like a pop song because it's got an accessible structure. And then one of my favorite composers was like, structure's overrated, bro. So I sort of had to rethink it. So now I'm in a kind of interesting place where I've spent the last few months writing music, and it's kind of to the point where I could finish it soon, but I'm also glad that I get to come and do this, because you don't know it yet, but one of you is going to probably ask me a question that's going to make me go and think and change the way that I make the music, so thank you in advance. But yeah, that's really it, to try and find stuff that I haven't done before that feels genuine, and it's not new for the sake of being new, but new because it kind of excites me. What was the question? Yeah, I think it's to experiment, kind of like if you throw a kid in a box of toys and they don't know what any of it is, but they just want to figure out why it's cool or why it's fun to throw at people. So I'll kind of do that with musical ideas until listening to it makes me think that it's about a certain emotion. So I might listen back to something and think, oh, that really is about how I was sad last week. And then I can really push that forward. And then that involves kind of using certain things, like, to me, a mellotron evokes sadness. I'm going to use a mellotron. Or having a lot of reverb and not much guitar playing feels more somber or sad or something, so I'm going to do that. So it comes from I think the first part would be experimentation without trying to think about what it might mean, and then figuring out why I did it or why it felt a certain way, and then using musical and production techniques to turn it into something that is going to best kind of represent that first idea. Yep.
So, when you're composing and you're just starting a song, I always get this urge to show this to people, like to get some kind of feedback, because I'm not convinced that it's good. I mean, I'm convinced that it's good, but I have no idea, you know, like how you're talking about how you wake up the next day and you're like, what the hell is this, you know? That's how I'm always feeling, that it's possibly being. So, would you suggest that you kind of wait to show it to people until you're kind of like you have a solid idea, or because I'm always trying to justify myself if someone's gonna say, you know, it's not very good, but I'm still, you know, that, you know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on your relationship with the person whose advice you want. There's no way in hell I would play anything that I'm working on to you guys, because I know it's not nearly at the point where all the stuff that you've ever heard me make is. And I wouldn't want to make it your job to kind of fill in the gaps and be like, oh yeah, I see where he's going with this, and I trust that he'll eventually mix it in a way that sounds good. But to like I don't know if you know each other, but your friend who kind of knows the way you work and stuff like that, maybe you can show them, you can just play them the riff and they'll be able to judge like, oh wow, like you're doing stuff that I haven't heard you do before, that's exciting, and I can tell why you like it. Like Jake, who plays guitar with me, sends me a lot of guitar pros of stuff that he's working on, and I hate Guitar Pro because I don't know how to use it. That's a bad way to go through life, but I can tell because he's done it so much, all the blanks that he'll fill in when he turns it into a song. Like I know what the drums are going to be like, what the production's going to be like. So I guess I can kind of tell whether what he's worked on is going to be exciting in a way that stuff he's done before is. In your case, I guess are you asking someone because you're worried that it might not be good, and hearing that it is good from someone else will give you some inspiration to work on it more?
I just feel like there are maybe gaps in the songs or even in the riffs that some advice, some feedback in that process would strengthen the quality, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, just...
The whole time that I've written music, it has been a totally alone thing. And then recently when I started to work with other drummers and bass players and stuff, I got less sort of attached to my ideas, so that if the drummer thought he should play that crash cymbal instead of that one, I wouldn't be like, dude, but I wanted that one. I kind of trust that he's played drums for a long time and he's really good, and I'm getting him to play drums because I like it. So I think if you're at a place with your own ideas where you don't feel like your vision is the most important thing, then you could show it to anyone, and I think that sort of collaboration will probably make it great. I don't know if you guys have listened to Song Exploder on Spotify. It's a podcast about how songs were written, basically. And there's one with Kimbra, who's a New Zealand singer, and the song that she's talking about was the first single, I think, on her last album, which made me kind of like her a lot less. But after listening to this, I was like, damn, you're actually a genius. And she'd gone to, I think, Skrillex, and he was playing her a bunch of stuff, and then found this one little loop that she really liked, so she sung on it, and then he did something to it, and then sent it to someone else, and it got passed around the whole world through like 10 or 20 of the best producers and musicians, until it eventually ended up back with her, and she turned it into a song, because I think it was going to end up as a beat for someone else. And I can imagine that you might be able to come up with your best music by doing something like that, especially because you're in a school with so much talent. You ask 5 guitarist friends and you get like pinch harmonic from this friend, little tapping thing from this friend, you've got the sickest riff anyone's ever heard. I guess as long as you're open to someone maybe saying, I don't like it, or it sounds like this, or there's no hope for you. And that doesn't mean that there's no hope for you, it's just people say mean things because it's fun. Does that help?
Yeah.
Cool. Yep.
You're an independent artist, right? So how did you first advertise your music when you were just starting?
When I first finished music in a way that I thought I could put under my own name and not be totally embarrassed, I put it on Bandcamp and YouTube and iTunes and Spotify and stuff like that. But until that point, I'd been posting on a lot of forums, asking for, sort of like you, asking for advice with mixing or just composition. And so there were a bunch of people on the forums who were like, oh, this guy's actually released music, cool, I'll check it out. And then I guess they will have shared it to their friends and sort of so on like that. But it was totally accidental and organic in the beginning. And then I did it more and more, and that's kind of it. And I find that that's what has worked for almost everyone that I know at every level. Like there are some guitarists who are releasing their first songs now, and just because they're really good and they got a really good video, or they've got just they're playing so good. You put it on Instagram, someone sees it, thinks it's cool, sends it to someone else, sends it to someone else. And I think that's a really fortunate thing for all of us living now, is that as long as there are people interested in a certain thing, they're going to find it on the internet, which means if you're doing something well and trying to present it in the best way possible, which could mean making a really nice video, it will be found. And then playing live helps, and all sorts of stuff that didn't really matter in the beginning but matters now. Like I have a friend who's really good at Facebook advertising, and I kind of leave it to him now, but he'll be like, I think you need more 24-year-old fans from Boston who like Tesseract. Like that'll get you those extra 5 tickets to your next show. So he'll go and like do something technical to try and make that happen. And I think that helps, but at the same time, you can't really advertise music that hasn't had a lot of thought put into it. So I guess the thing that I did first was spend 10 or 15 years writing music that wasn't good, or at least wasn't good in my opinion, to get to the point where I thought it was maybe good enough to share. But then if I look back at the first things I released, they had programmed drums and programmed bass and like double track guitar parts that didn't match and all kinds of noise, and I was recording stuff with like a handheld dictaphone. And I don't know, I would never do that now, but I'm glad I did at the time, because I guess it didn't really matter. But at the same time, it's a horrible thing if you think that you need to have the best sounding recording ever to release music, because then you're just going to be waiting and waiting and waiting. And again, I have lost the question, but I will remember it. Marketing, yeah, make the best music that you can, make it as original as possible, which is vague, but I guess just means question whether what you're creating is offering something different to all your current favorite bands. And then when you're at that point, hopefully the internet hasn't changed too much, and then it should be pretty sweet. Yep.
How do you go about writing melodies? Do you usually have something in your head and you audiate it, or do you just like noodle around, or like what are your techniques on writing melodies?
Definitely a lot of noodling, and definitely a lot of pentatonics. So usually most of the kind of cleverness will go into everything but the melody, and then the melody is just a case of finding the simplest possible note to put on top of it, and then trying every possible version of the phrasing to play it. So for example, in the song Away, I wrote this riff. because I wanted to rip off animals as leaders. Yeah, someone sung it. That was cool. But obviously, I'm not going to write a melody that stupid over the top. So I was just thinking, all right, here's the riff. So it's basically just this. And I like to kind of take everything back to Blink-182, Green Day, sort of the stuff that's so like built into the way that I think about music that it's easy. So if you think about that riff, it's just a... then you can write a melody over it that's quite simple, like that. And I guess with a melody like that, it's structurally, it's quite simple. There's a bit, and then there's a second bit, and then there's the first bit again, and then there's a bit that's different to the other bit, which I guess you might also call like A, B, A, C, or something like that. And I don't remember the first time that any idea like that was presented to me. It was probably in high school music, learning about classical composition, which I've forgotten all of, but remember just stuff like that, like, oh, composers used to structure things in that way, and it makes sense because you repeat something and you have familiarity, and then you change something and you have interest. So between repeating a bit of melody and changing a bit of melody, that's kind of like a very, very simple recipe for what could be a good melody. So it's kind of that process of experimenting till the first little bit seems powerful. So which actually reminds me of some cheesy sax ballad from the 70s. Careless Whisper, sort of. Don't think about it too much. And then the sort of chorus section of that song so that's kind of what the melody is. And it has all this sort of... But I don't really think about the little fast parts when I'm writing the melody. And actually something I find quite useful is if you are trying to write a simple melody over maybe a complicated part or interesting chords, is to sort of mess around on the guitar until you come across something that sounds cool, and then take another instrument that you can't play fast, like a bell, or if you're bad at keys, any keys. I have accepted that I'm not very good at keys, and I use that to help me compose melodies because I can only play 4 notes a minute, and that's kind of useful for writing a melody. So then sort of highlighting what's important in a flurry of notes could become the melody. Yeah, and then finding bits to repeat and bits to change and stuff like that. And I might play that song now because I haven't played it in a while and it's probably going to go horribly wrong. Thank you. I forgot that I had a solo to take in that. It was taken by someone else every other time. But anyway, thanks. Yep.
I've got two questions. So first one's more technical. When you're doing your low sort of chugging sections on the guitar, do you just use a gate to get that really tight sound, or do you actually go in there and cut the audio clip at each waveform to make it sound that tight? To get that very punchy transient effect.
Bit of both. So it's pretty gated. I am of the belief that recording is different to playing an instrument, and you don't have to be good to record as long as you don't lie when you play live, which is a long-winded way of saying I edit the fuck out of everything. So I will do that, but it also depends on the effect. Like when I was making most of this music, I was hugely influenced by Periphery because they were the first band that I really got into that was self-recording and kind of navigating the music industry in a really interesting way, as opposed to just being a band that you didn't really know who was in it and you couldn't talk to them and they weren't like kind of meeting people and talking to people. So I just became a huge fan of them, and they obviously were one of the first bands to kind of have that heavily processed guitar sound. So a lot of this music, that was the goal, was how can I try and make that sound. But now I'm exploring some different stuff. A lot of the guitar sounds that I really love at the moment are like Queens of the Stone Age, and there's a band called Everything Everything from the UK who are like the most progressive, secretly progressive pop band. So they play in a way that there is noise, and the left guitar and the right guitar maybe aren't totally matched and stuff like that. So to answer your question, yes, I will try and record it as best as I can, but if going in and moving stuff is the way to get that sound, I'll absolutely do that.
And then my other question was, on a more day-to-day basis, what is your breakdown or balance between getting to work on music, production, and/or composition, and then just the more business aspects of sustaining a financial career?
Yeah. That's a good. I don't know, man. So.
Parts of the business that you have to do that all the time that you can't ever push back to. Consistently have
Yeah.
to confront it.
I think, again, coming from my old age, I care less about certain things. For example, a few years ago, if someone had uploaded a full album to YouTube or something and was making money from putting ads on it, that may have slightly offended me and I'd kind of do something about it, whereas now I just laugh. And so I'm kind of just finding ways to compartmentalize what I think matters to making a living and making music and what doesn't, so that I do have more time mentally to just write music. On the way from the airport to here, in order to take my mind off the fact that I was late, I replied to a lot of emails, none of which was fun, but has to be done. When I'm at home, I typically try to get out of bed as fast as possible, because I get into the terrible habit of looking at my phone without getting out of bed, and I'm sure we all do this, and it's a recipe for disaster, because you finish the entire internet and then it's the next day, and then you're like, oh, it's the next day, I'll just like do it tomorrow, and you can just do that on and on. So I try and get out of bed first and like be a human being, which means like eat or go outside or something like that, and then start to get the little feeling of guilt that I haven't done anything yet. So open email, try and do as much as possible in order to be free to make music without any guilt that I owe someone a reply or something like that. But I'd say it's probably 25% music and 75% everything else, because everyone has a short attention span, and I need to remind you that my tab books are on sale for the next 3 days. And that's, yeah. Yep.
I was wondering if maybe you could share a little bit about your training or your educational path until where you are now.
Yep.
Like was it all private? Was it but you figuring out stuff, or teachers or mentors or?
I picked up drums when I was like 6 or 7 years old. Actually, before that, I picked up a pot and hit it with a spoon, and I was like, that's fucking sick. I want to do that all the time. I want to do it louder. And I somehow convinced my parents that a drum kit was a decent idea. And then I tried to learn the Beatles and didn't get very far because Ringo is not a good drummer, but I am even less of a good drummer. And then we moved and I couldn't play drums anymore possibly because it was too loud, but possibly just because it was very bad. And we had a ukulele, and I think it only had 3 strings at that point, and I used to just strum it because I guess it was the next best thing. And then somehow, and I'm not a particularly strong person, but somehow I shattered the entire body just from playing it. And thankfully I have supportive parents, so they gave me the option to get a new ukulele or to try a guitar. So I got a 3/4 scale classical nylon string and just started to, I think I got some sort of like basic guitar book where I learnt the C major scale in the position that no one's ever going to use it, and that was all the music theory that I had the time for. And then I started listening to Green Day and Blink-182 and bands like that and trying to learn stuff from them. And I remember one day, again, I don't know why I did this, but I took a small piece of paper and threaded it underneath the strings, like towards the bridge. And I don't know if any of you have ever done that, but it just makes it rattle. And it was like free distortion. So I used to play all these old punk riffs with this like buzzing, palm-muted guitar sound. And that just was really exciting for me. So I guess it was something like that that made me want to play electric guitar. And I can't remember what year it was, but then GarageBand came out, and I used to record the same buzzy acoustic guitar into the webcam mic and then put distortion on it. So if you listen closely, you could hear my parents talking in the background. And that was how I got interested in recording. And so I'd do that and then drag drum loops into it and kind of cover punk songs. Some of them had vocals, and none of you will ever hear that. And then eventually persuaded my way to get an electric guitar. So I got a Strat copy that we probably all own one, and started learning Red Hot Chili Peppers and stuff like that. And I think that was the point that I started to get into metal, which meant I started buying Metal Hammer magazine and like Guitar World and stuff like that. So I'd start learning bits and pieces of the tabs that came for free with those. And also the internet started getting better. Australia's internet is still somewhere like 20 years ago. Sometimes I will literally wait till I get here to upload videos to YouTube because it only takes an hour instead of 24. So I was getting into metal, I was getting into guitar players, and then I got seriously into music like Dream Theater and Steve Vai and Joe Satriani and all those guys. So I started learning bits and pieces of that, and I think that's it. I haven't really got anywhere since then. But it was like my whole foundation in the guitar was magazine tutorials and learning tabs, which might have been wrong, but it didn't really matter to me, of songs that I liked. And that's how I got around just ideas of different chords or different shapes for scales. I still remember there's a Trivium song. You guys like that band? they got cool again, which I like. I think as something like that. You know it? You can't all talk at once. That's my job. But at the end of that bit, whatever it is, it goes. And I was like, oh, I learnt the minor scale. Thanks, Matt Heafy. And so that was the first time, and I can't do it on this guitar because it's a drop tuning, but that was the first time I could play a scale on all 6 strings all the way through. And that, sadly enough, was a major piece of theory learning for me because I had a full scale shape. And then I was like, oh, maybe I can play it in different places, and then kind of work through that. But then I stopped being as interested in playing other songs and got more interested in trying to make my own. So I would take all the stuff that I knew from those songs and just mess around with recording it, and then come across chords and start experimenting with different chords. So maybe instead of... This is another trivium one. And so that became my new idea of what E minor was. So instead of ever doing, I just always do. And just add a second into all chords. And I did that for years, and I was like, that's the coolest thing ever. And then I probably found this chord. And it's sort of just stuff like that where my idea of what a certain chord could be got slowly more and more complicated. And I'm looking forward to when E minor to me is like... I guess it is now. Like that sounds cool to me. And then the melody note could be something totally unrelated, and eventually I think I'll find that beautiful for some reason. But so it was all really trial and error and learning stuff that I like the sound of, and then trying to incorporate those sounds into making my own music. Yep.
What was sort of in the beginning period where you were releasing your first music that you said you felt comfortable the rest of the world hearing? What was the, I guess, transition or relationship between becoming good enough at your own self-production to then also then how much did you use other producers or friends of yours to then help you get to the, to the place it needed to be in order to be released? And then has that balance changed, and how did you get in contact with those producers and whatnot?
So the first stuff I released, I did all myself, mixing and mastering. And then I met a guy called Luke Martin on the internet, I think on MySpace, because there was a time when MySpace was cool, and you just find bands and be like, hey, I like your band, and then they'd be like, hey, I like your band too. And it's kind of like internet dating, but without the there was no more going on. And so this guy, Luke, who was cool and is cool, had bought a compressor, like a hardware compressor, and he was like, oh, I can master something for you. And I was like, cool, you got a compressor? I don't. You're better then. And so he mastered some stuff for me, and then I decided I wanted real drums, and I had accidentally, luckily met Marco Miniman, who's a crazy prog drummer, who has his own studio, which meant that he just recorded it and sent it to me, and I used the knowledge that I had from mixing program drums to try and mix his drums. And then on the next recording, I wanted real drums again, and I wanted Troy, who I'd been playing with, but he can record himself, but he's not quite an engineer. But the bass player I'd been playing with, Simon, had been working in studios for a long time, so knew everything about mic placement and that sort of thing. So he engineered those drums and then mixed them, but I was still mixing all the guitars. And then the next thing, Simon had been producing and mixing so much that everything he did sounded way better than I could ever imagine doing myself, so I let him do it. So it was a very gradual sort of production upscaling, I guess you could call it, based on knowing people that I was comfortable with who were better at certain things than me. And again, I think that's such a good thing about the fact that you're all here is in this room there is probably every single skill set you need to make something amazing. So if you know someone that is a better mix engineer than you and you don't enjoy it, I would say get them to do it because they're going to learn and get better from doing it, and you're going to have all this free time to take photos of yourself or something, which is marketing. What was the other part of the question? So that's the trick. You go out knowing less but smiling. Yep. Yeah, you.
Oh, yeah. So you did that thing with C2I. So like, how is the songwriting process different from that, from like your normal working with another person like you?
If anyone doesn't know, I wrote a split EP with a Scottish guitarist called C2I. And we really just wrote 2 songs each independently, but played a solo on one of each other's. But I think because it was sort of unique and fun, I tried to rip off his style a bit, so it's a little kind of like bouncier and happier than what I would usually do, and I think he did the same in return. But generally it was just writing music for fun. Yep. Okay.
Have you ever suffered from like the whole big fish and like a small pool thing? Like, if you ever get really intimidated by a certain like musical landscape or environment, and how you deal with it?
Yeah, definitely. Almost all the time, in a sort of business music industry sort of way, because I've never had a team or anything, and I don't know, or I didn't know anything about anything. But through good luck and I guess being nice, which I would highly recommend to everyone, I made one friend in the Australian music scene who manages a bunch of bands and was happy to give me advice if I needed it. So the first time I got invited to play in the US, I need a very complicated and expensive visa to not end up in jail. And I had no idea where to get it because everyone that I know in a band is typically signed to a record label who can be your employer. So it's kind of like they give you this job overseas where you work for 3 or 4 weeks. But I couldn't do that, so my friend told me about an agency here that can sponsor you if you can demonstrate that you're exceptional in some way. So then I went through the whole process of reading every single thing about every document that's involved in this application for a visa. And like the previous week when I was trying to play a blues scale as fast as possible, I was not thinking that that is what I would be doing the next week. But the more I do stuff like that, the more I accept that the world is weird and knowing stuff doesn't hurt. So I try to take everything as a fun challenge in just learning something useless that I really don't want to know about, but will at least help me get to play guitar more. So a lot of stuff like that. I still don't understand how publishing works, really, and I feel like a lot of it's antiquated because everyone streams music now, so there's like, you don't generate a royalty by printing a CD if you never print a CD. And I mean, hopefully there's a class about that here somewhere, because if you make your own music, you're going to run into it. But I guess I can make you feel better that I really don't understand it, but I still can make music, and I'm not in jail. So, sorry, what was the question? I'm good at getting sidetracked.
It was like, have you ever been? You kind of answered.
Yeah, yeah, all the time. Especially because I don't have a manager when I'm going on tour with a band that I'm not friends with yet, or even that I am friends with. There's something about band managers that is often quite terse. I like to use a lot of emojis and exclamation marks in emails, and they don't. So I'll send this long, friendly email like, hey, so excited to go on tour with blah, 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 blah. Just wondering about this bus payment or something like that. I have this bank account or whatever. Can we do this, this, this? and then they'll do the thing that we all know people do, which is reply to like 50% of the email and not the rest. And there are typos, and you just get this sense that they really don't give a shit and you're wasting their time. So there's just that. That happens all the time. But doing it more and more, I've learnt to persist with emojis because they might not be that stoked, but I can still be stoked at all times. And kind of feeling comfortable that I'm not doing anything wrong by asking a question or not knowing something. I think that's pretty important as well, because we're all trying to learn and develop and get better at stuff. Is having a question and not asking it, I think, can make you a lot more nervous than getting it over and done with and just asking. And I'm going to teach with Steve Vai and Joe Satriani next week, if that says anything about feeling like a small fish. Yes. Yep.
So, two quick questions. You were talking about I knew this person helped me out with mixing. So what tip would you give us, like in this contemporary world of networking? How would you deal with networking, especially if you're like an independent artist? And my second question is, how was it to release Archetype?
Second part first was awesome. I was just talking to Doug, who runs Neural DSP. If you don't know, I have a plugin for guitar that came out recently. Basically, you plug your guitar into your computer, and it sounds better than any other gear you can find. And try it, and you'll believe me. So that was cool. That took a long time to do, but they're all incredible. And in that process, they hired some people who have PhDs in like electrical engineering and like designing reverbs. And so it was very exciting and fun to kind of have these people doing things to realize something that I was thinking of. So that was...
My question is, what did you learn from it, actually? What did you learn from this?
I learned that having a team that's amazing is a really rewarding experience, because I'm usually alone. So I have to, I come up with ideas and make them happen totally alone. Whereas coming up with an idea and being like, this guy's really good at it, this girl's really good at that thing, they're really good at this thing, and then you can all get together once you have progress and celebrate it, is something that I kind of miss. But I get to go on tour with a band, so it's kind of similar. That was a big thing. And also just, again, that you can be professional but also fun. They were hassling me to send them feedback and clips and presets and stuff like that while I was on tour. And so I would spend a lot of time lying. I don't have Wi-Fi today, but I would be sending them the message. So, because I would be tired, or I'd be in a loud green room and I couldn't do the thing that needed to be done. But there was a good understanding of their team can't work 23 hours a day, and I can't always do this certain thing, but we're all going to do our best. So it was just a cool experience to work with such good people. And I guess that ties into networking. So I met Doug, who started the company at NAMM, the instrument convention, which I guess we all have been to or would like to go to, which is actually where I met Tim. I'll tell that story afterwards. I met him because my bass player plays dark glass pedals, and Doug knew of my music through Simon playing dark glass pedals on the recordings, and then we just kind of saw each other once a year. And then he started a software company and reached out to me to make a plugin. And just because I knew that he was making the best bass pedals and he was a really nice guy, I was like, yes, sounds like a good idea. So much stuff has happened through, I guess, chance. I met Simon and Jake at a John Petrucci clinic because they were studying music with a couple of guys that were in a Dream Theater cover band with a keyboard player that I met in high school because I walked past a music room and he was playing a Dream Theater song. And it's really weird to reverse engineer how it's all happened. But again, you guys are all forcing yourself into the best scenario because you go to Berkeley. So, yeah, and like Tim, Jake showed me one of his albums a few years ago, and I was like, I don't understand. And then a few months later, I listened to it again, and I was like, I still don't understand, but I really like it. And then he became one of my favorite guitarists and songwriters, and then happened to, I guess, walk to the Strandberg booth at NAMM, and Ola, who makes the guitars, texted me and was like, Tim's at the booth. And I was just like, and just ran over, and then he happened to be really nice, which is a bonus. And then I guess we became friends, and I did my very, very best attempt at writing evil chords in a song recently, and then tried my very best to sound like him, and it wasn't working. So I luckily had his email and was like, could you please be yourself on this music for me? And thankfully he did. And so it's just kind of a weird world of meeting someone at some point because of someone, and then I really like to stay in touch with people who I just genuinely like, or get a good, this sounds a bit too hippie, but like get a good vibe from. And again, you probably experience it more on a day-to-day basis than me because you're in a music school, but there are some people who will be your friend for a certain reason, and some will just be your friend because they like stuff. And so when I come across someone that I just get along with well because we like food or we like clouds or something silly, we'll just stay friends because that's kind of what humans like to do. And then eventually something comes up where something they're really good at can complement something you're really good at, and it kind of goes on like that. At this point, I've met a lot of my favorite musicians, and that hasn't necessarily benefited my life as much as certain other people or other musicians, because it's like, it's cool to know people, but at the end of the day, it's the people that you can create cool stuff with or have a good time with that are more valuable, I guess, if that makes sense. Yeah. Up the back. Hey, man.
The first question is, one of the reasons why I really love your music is it's very evident that a lot of care has gone into making it. It's very well crafted. I'm not really talking it from a technical point of view, but also, like you mentioned, the emotional portion of the song and even the mixing process and stuff. So you have like I mean, the fact that it is crafted so well would imply that you will need to spend time on it. It's not just something you want to put out ASAP or. So what are some of the self-imposed timelines for putting out your stuff usually? And the second part is, you usually like, are you someone who always writes a lot so that you're recording voice notes on the phone, and at what point do you decide to take a song further, and how many songs actually end up seeing the light of day? So, yeah.
In terms of the voice notes thing, I probably record less now than I used to, and I think that's because my critic, like inner critic, is better at writing off bad ideas faster. So for the album that I'm working on at the moment, there were probably 20 ideas in the beginning, but then it quickly became 10, and I'm kind of working on all of them at the same time with the aim that 8 of them will become good. But there's a fun little race going on between the 3 worst ones for who can impress me the most. But I don't know if that's not a good thing or a bad thing. There are some people that I know that can produce so many ideas so quickly, and they're all valuable. And then there are some people who will write one thing a year, but it's going to be the best thing you've ever heard. And then in terms of the self-imposed timelines and deadlines, I try to have a balance between, I'd say Carnival. There's an Australian band called Carnival who have put out 3 albums in a very long time. In my opinion, they have ruined their chance of being a big band worldwide because they don't do anything. Like, they'll do one Australian tour every year, and I think they came to the States once or twice when they first started, and then never again. And same with Europe. And because I love touring and I love travel, I'm mindful of the fact that if I take 5 years to make an album, or if I just leave that long between coming back on tour, that's not going to be a good thing. But at the same time, I would never rush music for the sake of doing an activity that revolves around it, if that makes sense. Because I think really the music is the most important thing that you do. And so I guess part of it is being thankful, but also working really hard on just making good music, or at least music that I think's good, so that I can use that to do all the other stuff. I was talking to Aaron Marshall yesterday, maybe today, I don't know what time is anymore, yesterday, about just the way that all the bands that were popular when we first started have gone in different directions. Like, some of them are starting to tour less, but they still release music. And I think that's kind of the best thing, because if we're all musicians and we like making music, I don't see why not touring anymore would be a reason to stop making music. But then there's the bands that will tour non-stop, like year after year after year, and then get tired. And I think getting tired is a terrible idea musically. So yeah, it's, I guess, about finding a balance between getting to do the stuff that I like travel and hang out with my friends on tour, but trying to make the best possible music first. Yeah.
When do you know when something is done?
When it sounds kind of like other music that you like, I think. It depends. From a mix point of view, never. From a compositional point of view, I guess never as well. I guess you could get a feeling that it's done. I'm trying to think, because this is a hard question for me, because I'm in the middle of writing songs. So I wish I knew, and now I'm having like a little internal struggle. Like, am I even halfway, or am I close? Am I nowhere near? Does anyone have an answer for that? Tim Miller, when is something done?
Can't do it anymore. You step it down, basically. It just gets to that point when it's, like you said, it's kind of close to what your ideal is, but you just can't go any further.
So it's quite a painful thing. But are you secretly, or not secretly, but at least a little bit excited, or can you celebrate that you've decided that it's finished?
Yeah. You just know, it's like I think I could go further, but if I did, it would just be going over and over and over again. But you know, it's like your best for now. That ceiling.
Yeah. And actually, I think that's a really cool thing to keep in mind, and something that I've noticed the more I write music, is that the stuff that I'm writing now is like kind of launching off what I managed to do last, and that was launching off what I managed to do before that, and so on. So if you can consider something finished now, then the stuff that you start writing based on everything you learned from doing that is going to be beginning already kind of at a better place, and then keep going. And I mean, music doesn't kill people, so it's fine to make as much of it as possible, and some of it maybe won't be as good, but it's kind of just like a drawing out process of playing with ideas as you get more and more comfortable with it.
Do you ever get the urge to like go back and try to do something you did before to your new standards now? Because as you said, like everything keeps getting better. Do you ever want to go back and do an old song, but make it how you would make it now?
I did that with a song on Handmade Cities, the album called Pastures. So that was 7 or 8 years old, and then I re-recorded it and kind of changed it a little bit. And I can't remember if I just did that for the sake of adding length to an album or because I thought it was cool. I guess something that I'm not opposed to is having an idea now that I don't actually start turning into a song for a few years. There was a time when I thought that making an album is something that you decide, like at this point in the year, I'm going to start making an album and it's going to take me this many months and then it's going to be finished and it's going to capture those months. And I think that's a totally valid thing to do, but I also like the idea of taking an idea from many years ago and reflecting on it and being like, with everything that I've learnt and thought about and felt since then, like what can I do to discuss that idea now? So the stuff that I'm working on now, some of them are ideas that I had in the last year, and some of them are 5 years old, but if I'd made them then, they wouldn't have made sense, or they wouldn't have got to that sort of level. Yep.
So how would you go about having your band open for larger artists? Because it seems so unaccessible, you know, talking to or making friends with someone that's got an image and really taking it, because they're doing you a favor more than really you're doing them a favor. It seems like,
Yeah.
what's in it for them? What, you know.
I think that being an opening band is less and less important these days because of the internet. And I think the effect of that is that the people who put on the shows are less interested in opening bands that don't already have some sort of internet presence or history. Because it gets to a point where it's just a no-brainer. Like a couple of tours ago, we had a bunch of different local acts, and that was the first time that I did a headlining tour in the States. So it was kind of an interesting relationship between me, my booking agent, and the promoters, so the people that were arranging the venue and paying us to do it, basically. Because I'd never done it, so I couldn't really expect anything. So there were some cities where a promoter has a local band that they're just really good friends with or have done a bunch of shows for, and I could totally hate the band, but I also can't say no because I'm thankful to the promoter for even having me come there in the first place. On the other hand, there are some cities where I know like it's going to be sold out, so I would like you to put on this artist that I really like that no one cares about and the audience probably won't like, but I'll get to see them, so it'll be sick. So there's a lot of like balancing what is comfortable to ask for. But I think if your band already has some interest, if you have social media following, that's immediately going to be more attractive to the venue or the promoter. I think I might be different to a lot of bands because I tend to care about this stuff. I know a lot of bands aren't even aware of the opening band, like they might still be at a hotel when they're playing and stuff like that. Which is kind of even more of a reason these days, I think, to work on developing your band for the music and just as something that people can find out about through the internet. Because I think less and less bands are being discovered from a show, or at least it's much less time and cost effective than posting a video and then going to sleep and waking up and 100 people saw it. Hopefully that wasn't a depressing answer. But at the same time, feel free to mention your band name and then I'll remember it forever so I can decline. But I mean, like, I can't remember where, somewhere in Texas, I met a friend of a friend of a friend, and because I liked that friend a lot, I listened to the other friend's band, and they were sick, and so we did some shows together. And it's, again, what we were talking about, just the random connections that happen through being friendly. Yep, at the back.
What's the most important thing you look for in a guitar, and how's it like to do so on the guitar?
The most important thing I look for is a lack of a headstock. I don't know, so I've been playing these for a really long time, and this is my signature guitar, and I still have not found anything that I like more than it. The first time I saw it, I just thought it looked cool and beautiful and well designed and stuff, and then the more I learnt about it and the way that it is designed to be ergonomic and light and everything, kind of just sold me on it more. And then as I got to know the people in the company better and better, and they're all lovely and they're all helpful, that made it hard to ever be interested in anything else. I guess it's kind of like meeting a girl or a guy, and you just find out everything about them is amazing, so then you kind of start checking out other people less, and you still do sometimes, but like you go home to them and you're like, yeah, I made the right choice. And so that's where I'm at. Designing a signature guitar is, I don't know, amazing because it's like a childhood dream. I guess it's a little disappointing because it's not Ibanez. But don't tell Strandberg that. No, I mean, I grew up idolizing Ibanez players. I would love to. I'm going to see them in a few days. Yeah, I can't really complain. Yep.
Yeah, okay. What was a turning point in your career? Music. A big turning point. Like, this made me go from a not well-known artist to like being wired.
Almost nothing, which I'm sort of thankful for, because I think it would be really scary to be one of those bands or artists that has a huge radio hit, and then you suddenly get skyrocketed to a certain place, and then it's uncertain if you'll be able to replicate it or stuff like that. I mean, I've had certain milestones that become sentences in a bio. Like the first time I got to do a clinic here was a huge deal for me personally, because I remember the first time I heard about this school in a Dream Theater documentary. I was like, that's the fucking best place in the world. And then I got to come and teach here as though I know stuff, and that's really awesome. And so now that's, anytime I'm doing anything remotely educational, I will be like, and he has done clinics at Berkeley. And so that's really cool, but I guess that it hasn't necessarily changed my life. And like certain big festivals, again, become a cool sentence to put in a bio, but I didn't suddenly make 100,000 fans from it or anything like that. Everything's just sort of been really incremental. Meeting certain people that become inspirational or helpful at another point a few years down the track, or stuff like that. But yeah, and I think that can be really comforting, because then you don't have to be worried about waiting for a certain big breakthrough if it is incremental. You just slowly get better and better and kind of just like tumble into wherever it is you're tumbling to. Yep.
I'll say that I watched the YouTube interview with you saying like how like a whammy tremolo is very like big part of what you do. I just wanted to know like how like what tips can you give us, like, oh, instead of me bending it, I'm just use a whammy bar and just get a better emotion. How do you like decide that?
Yeah. When I first got a guitar with a tremolo, I think I was really excited to do all of that all the time, and I'm glad I did. And then I learned stuff like and I'm glad I did all that too. You'll never hear me do it now aside from then. Actually you will, because it's sick. But that meant that when I eventually got to recording a melody, like just from having done it before and being comfortable with it, I have the option to go. And so the vibrato that you can get from is different to it. And the bend you can get from it's just a different way to articulate it. And that goes for all the techniques, like bending, sliding. And I guess the more you know, the less you have to use any of it too much. Yep.
Great to hear you, Tim. When you're working on a song, like, do you ever find yourself losing momentum or having writer's block? And if so, like, how do you push yourself through that?
Take a break. Definitely take a break. Another thing that I found from doing stuff like this is that most of my answers for questions are incredibly underwhelming. And the short version of everything we've talked about is it all takes time, smile and be nice. But yeah, with writer's block, if it's coming from the place where I have no music written and I want to create something new, then listening to new music and finding little things in it, maybe it's like a rhythm or a chord or an arrangement technique, and then just recreating it exactly might teach me something new that I can use, or maybe taking chords from something but using them on a different instrument might generate a cool new idea. And then with that cool new idea, you can throw all the other previous songwriting techniques and stuff like that into it. And that's actually usually how most of my ideas come about. If you're working on something and you're halfway, or you've written 30 seconds and it's great, but you don't know what should come next. Something that for some reason helps me is bouncing it out of Logic and then going for a walk and listening to it as a file. For some reason, looking at it and being able to do stuff makes me pay less attention to what it sounds like on the whole. So I'll go for a walk, listen to it on repeat until I hate myself, and usually come across something that I think should go there. If it's a drum fill, or like the next section should come in like this, and then that kind of puts the next little piece of the puzzle in and you can bounce off that. Asking a friend, oh, he left. Asking a friend or someone you trust can be a huge help, because you know when you're starting to get frustrated and doubting yourself, the answer's probably incredibly obvious. So yeah, stuff like that. But again, I guess luckily we're all going to live for quite a long time, and a song's only 5 minutes. So you'll find the time to find the rest of the song, probably in the same hour, because it's such a little amount of stuff. That was a very unhelpful answer. Thanks. Yep.
I'm curious, how exactly does a tremolo on that Sternberg work? Is it fully floating?
Yeah. I think I can do that. Yeah, it's not, this sounds like an insult. It's not quite as good as like the Petrucci model ones for doing the fluttery stuff, but that could also be my setup, which I know nothing about and has just been like this for years, and sometimes I clean the guitar and that's it. But yeah, it's fully floating. Yep.
When you were first starting, how do you support yourself financially to like record and like start like moving around and getting on?
When I first started recording, I was using almost entirely free software. I entered a guitar solo competition that was sponsored by TuneTrack, who make a bunch of drum software, and I came third or something, and the prize was a bunch of drum software, which helped. I I pirated a lot of things, which I wouldn't recommend, and I went and bought them all a few years ago. Actually, after I'd first made money from releasing music, I deleted them all and bought the ones that I actually used to feel better about myself morally. I went to university and studied architecture, so I was making music as a hobby on weekends and whenever I had spare time, and I got a part-time job in an architecture office to save up for an Axe-Fx. I think I was on the wait list for like a year in Australia, and I had just saved enough money to buy it as it got to my point on the wait list, and I haven't really bought much since then. I sort of just tried to figure out what's the very least setup that I would need to make music and not worry about gear. And between free plugins and Axe-Fx, I think that's all I really needed. And I mean, these days you can get good drums. It's pretty cheap. Helix Native is cheap. My plugin's cheap. You can get a 14-day trial for free. So if you can create a new identity every 2 weeks, I think you can have it free forever. Don't tell them I said that. Yeah. And then I definitely am not qualified to give anyone economic advice, but my whole attitude to money has always been to not spend it unless it's going to bring me some amount of joy. So I just didn't spend much money while I was working so that when I could go on tour, I had enough saved up to lose it over and over again for a couple of years until I was no longer losing it. But then now I find new ways to lose it, like hiring more crew. So it's just like a constant balancing act between being excited by the idea of doing stuff, but not spending money on things that I don't need. Like even our live setup now is a bit of a joke compared to other bands. We have one rack unit that has one Axe-Fx, and that's shared between 2 guitarists and is outputting all the tracks and the click track, and it's controlled by a laptop, which is the same laptop I watch movies on and send emails, which is also a terrible idea because that makes it way more susceptible to any error. Like, where were we? I was doing a clinic with Aaron, and he has a show laptop, which is a very sensible thing that has literally nothing installed on it except the program that runs the tracks, because it just makes it less likely for anything bad to happen. But I'm kind of, this lives in my backpack, I throw that around. I travel with an Axe-Fx in my suitcase, padded by clothes. I've never paid for excess baggage anywhere in the world, and I think it's just stuff like that that really helps. And that also goes back to being a big fish and little fish, is that I have a much less serious, or I guess professional in a superficial way, approach to everything. But I think if something will get the job done, then that's what ultimately matters. Yep.
You were talking about like Easy Drum for the tune track and stuff
Yeah.
like that. How much do you use it for composition? And do you normally send like what you really want to be in your songs to the bassist and the drummer, or do you just leave them like completely free to do whatever they think is right for the song?
When I first started, I would program drums to be as realistic and interesting as possible. But as I worked with drummers and realized that because they're passionate about it, they're much better than I ever will be, I got a lot lazier. And now I have streamlined the drum writing process to the bare minimum, almost to the point where I like to challenge the drummer to take something that makes no sense and make it musical. So I'll do the absolute bare minimum for that, because I'm working with a musician who I trust and also who I know understands what my idea is for the song. So it becomes quite fast to send a really shit beat to a drummer and they'll turn it into music. And similar for the bass, but I get a little bit more particular because it's following the guitar or embellishing certain parts. Yep.
What's the best advice you've ever gotten in music?
best advice? The most helpful. I can't remember. I should come up with something for that.
What's the best advice you can give us as like upcoming musicians?
Have fun. Which is too easy to forget, I think, because there's so much stuff that can make you stressed. There's all the obvious stuff, like not playing well enough, which you'll never achieve if that's your mindset. But then there's stuff like my compressor setting's not ideal, and that pisses me off because I know I can sound better if I can figure out how to get that like nice snappy attack. And then there's like the feeling when you send an email and you reread it and you're like, oh, did I say that? Did I sound too needy or something like that? And there's just, I guess it might be more so me than you, or maybe more so you guys than me, but everything you can do can become stressful if you overthink it or think that it's not good enough. But yeah, if you treat it as a game, and I think you should, because you play music, you don't like work music, then it can be fun. Yep.
This might be like a couple too many questions. Like I think they all relate to the same thing. So, where do you want your music to go? Like, where do you want it to be? Like
Stadium.
What do you want your music to be like for people in terms of the culture and in terms of like what's your vision in terms of what your music's going to be like for generations to come and worldwide?
I think the two biggest inspirations for me for like a kind of overall thing would be Snarky Puppy and Steve Vai. Snarky Puppy because they're such an elaborate band and so good at it and so professional, but you see them and they're just a bunch of people having fun. But they're also able to play big stages, sound really good, have trees on stage if they want. Like that sort of stuff really excites me. If I can one day have a tree on stage, that'll be a good time. And then Steve Vai, because I think the last album he put out was my favorite, and that's incredibly rare for me to have an artist who I got into a long time ago release newer music that I like more than the stuff that I liked when I first got excited about them. And also the fact that he's incorporated so much different stuff, like playing with orchestras, having a charity, keeping bees, having cool signature products. I like the idea of using music as a way to branch out into a lot of different things. So ultimately, if I can keep finding ways to write music that I think is exciting and creative and then use that as a platform to do other stuff, that would make me very happy. And if I can come back here in like 20 or 30 years and be able to grow a beard and be wise, that's definitely another goal. Yep.
You said you studied architecture in college. I studied math in architecture, and like I was just wondering what was your relationship with architecture, and you had a job as an architect or an intern or something, and then how did you still make time to commit to music? Like how was that plot twist?
In the 5 years that I studied, I put out 30 minutes of music, if that tells you anything about time management. Yeah. But I guess it helped me with a lot of things like time management, because a lot of the projects were things that you would work on for half a year or for the whole year, which is a lot like making an album. You have to have some sort of vision, but then also be flexible to that vision changing as you get better at things, or as certain things don't work, or as certain events happen in life that you didn't account for. I think that's also the only reason that I'm even remotely comfortable doing this and talking to people, is because I had to do a lot of presentations. To the point where a lot of the time I'm more comfortable saying something stupid into a microphone than I am making a mistake on the guitar. Yes.
When did you decide to quit architecture?
As I was finishing my last project at the end of the 5th year, I was too busy to keep working, so I never really quit. I wonder if that means I'm technically still employed, but I just stopped going and then eventually never went again because I graduated and thought I'm going to try music out, and then started putting together my first show and then went from there. Yep.
So like, what's your take on when gear just starts to take over like the inspirational process? Like, say when you find like a new plugin, but you find like you spend too much time messing around with the plugin, and then you do like writing music. And, like, how do you go about that?
I don't think it's ever a bad thing unless you're spending literal months like absorbed in just the wet dry knob of a plugin. That's probably not a waste of time, because that time you spend getting excited about that, you're going to explore all these different sounds, and then a couple of years later you'll write a riff or a chord progression and you'll know exactly what you need to do to bring it to life with that thing. So I think anytime you end up kind of going down a rabbit hole with a new technique or piece of technology or gear or thought or anything, there's almost always going to be a way that can go on to help you with something else in the future. Yep.
I was just wondering if you got any tips on keeping like a healthy balance, like be it music and lifestyle and touring. Is there anything that you've learned along the way that can help?
Yeah, something that I started doing in the last few months or so was realizing that being a human being is probably the most important thing. So a lot of the time, I used to, and still do, but more so in the past, would get pretty attached to being really responsive to everyone at all times and like replying to emails quickly and that sort of thing. But now I will like just disappear for a couple of days and just go to a park and not give a fuck. And that, I think that is where I found a nice balance. And I guess taking everything that isn't actually making music less seriously is also quite helpful. Because like I was saying before, there's just so much stuff that can build stress into your mind if you let it be something that you care about. But if the only thing that you really care about is making like good, honest music, then it's the rest of the stuff won't affect you as much, which gives you more mental freedom to keep making music. But I guess the simple answer is I like to spend a few hours a day outside just ignoring everything and like laughing at a bird. And I realize that makes me sound like all I do is smoke weed, but I actually don't ever. I just like simple things. Yep.
So, like, apart from being an amazing musician, I think that's something that sets you apart is like your image. So how did you like develop your aesthetic? I guess you could say like your artwork and all that stuff that makes you you, I guess.
Yeah. I guess going to architecture school had an impact because all the people that I was friends with were just really into design and fashion and graphic design and art and stuff like that. So I was exposed to a lot of different things which led me to form my own taste. So when it went to designing posters for tours and stuff like that, I had a predisposition to caring about the font that was used and the way the letters are spaced and all that sort of thing. And I've also been a huge fan of bands as kind of an entire entity, not just the music for a long time. So being a huge fan of Dream Theater, a lot of their album covers had sort of stuff that tied into one another. And then these days, most of the kind of like pop world or like pop-ish world has like the best graphic design ever. And seeing that makes me want to try and bring that into our world, which I'm definitely not yet, but would like to. So I guess just being interested in that sort of stuff has made me value it, which means that when it comes to doing something, I try to make sure it is meeting the same standards for those things as the music does. Yep.
I don't know if you do that, but how do you see your music in a social context? Like, do you ever think politically your music? Or do you ever think in a broader societal way? Because I've studied politics, so I try always to see how my music fits in a social context. Do you ever do that?
I just realized that we're way over time. It doesn't matter. Cool. Do we have a kick-out time? Okay. It's interesting because I don't have lyrics. If I had lyrics, I would probably lose all my fans because I care about certain things that other people might not and stuff like that. When I was younger, I probably would be more prone to want to argue with people with opposing views. And these days, I just think that if someone is a good person, then what makes them a good person is less relevant. So I try to make music that will ultimately make people want to treat each other well. And that's not something that you can really intend. Like, I'm not going to say, I'm going to play D and G, because then you're going to look at him and high-five him. But I try to have a, like, sort of atmosphere or culture of, like, this sort of thing, or a live show, or the way that I talk to people, where it's friendly and you come to a show and you go home feeling better, which is hopefully going to make you treat your friends and family better, which is going to make them feel better, which will make them treat people better, and so on. So I guess that's me kind of trying to give myself some sort of feeling good that making weird music isn't totally useless. Yeah, I don't know. I may get more, like, political in the future, but I haven't really, I don't think I have a strong enough education or position on anything to suddenly be like, this is about this, and if you don't like it, then you need to go away, sort of thing. Does that answer the question? Yep.
Where do you see the sound going, like, in the next 5 years? Like, are there any other genres that you could see yourself playing in under the Plini name?
I don't think I would change sounds too drastically, because I've always tried to make music that is just the music that I want to hear. But it slowly changes, like I incorporate different instruments and different harmonies and stuff like that. I don't think I'm going to suddenly come out with a dance album. But you never know. I might go to Europe one summer and change forever. So I guess we got time for one or two more, and then I'll play a song. Yep.
You said that you quit architecture and you started planning your first show. Did you have any music out already before that?
Yeah, I had just enough for a set, so I had about 35 minutes. That was out. I had 3 EPs and a bunch of random songs.
How far after that did you say, like, all right, maybe I should get a booking manager and start doing things?
Thanks to the internet, one of the people that came to my first show was the bass player of a band called North Lane, and that show went really well, so he sent my music to their booking agent. And then I did a little DIY tour a couple of months later based on that show being good. I went to a few cities in Australia, and that tour went well, so North Lane's booking agent called me and wanted to meet up and see what I was doing. And again, I had no idea, like, how anything in the music industry worked, so I just assumed that he wasn't trustworthy. But he was a nice guy and is still my booking agent. And again, like with everything else, it just sort of trickled or tumbled forward from there. Like, doing an Australia tour went well, so I got to support Tesseract in Australia, and then some other bands, and then I think that kind of indirectly led to doing a US tour and a European tour with Tesseract, because when it came down to who they would want to take, it was like, oh yeah, those weird Australians we met 3 years ago, yeah, fine. Yep. And one more, if there is one.
Is Plini your real name?
It is.
Okay.
That's the perfect last question. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me. Have fun. I'm going to play a song. My favorite bit, because my other guitar player plays all the weird chords. I get to just stand there. Thank you. Enjoy your lives.
Thank you guys for coming, and it was a great clinic, and thank you for all your insights. So enjoy the afternoon.
so sorry, man. I have your whole trilogy book right here.
I'm just putting this down.
Oh, yeah.
Let him finish up.
Oh, sorry. I'm just so excited right now.